Good evening. Welcome to WNPE and WNPI's first in a series of outdoor shows entitled Cabin Country, which I am fortunate enough to be the host. With me co-hosting on the show will be my trusty friend right here, Gus. Gussie's a golden retriever. He's 2 years old. Faithful family pet and friend. Gus is on the show try to keep me cool, calm, and collected, because this really isn't my profession. My profession's usually behind the camera. Since moving up to WNP, WNPI from Channel 7 in Watertown, and having been associated with Glenn Goff on North Country Sportsman, I had an overwhelming urge to start some kind of an outdoor show. And in doing so, we hit upon a new hour show that we've entitled Cabin Country. And on Cabin Country, we're going to try and cover subjects such as hunting, fishing, conservation, the outdoors, maybe snowmobiling, ecology, the environment, pollution. Try to cover the whole gamut of outdoor sport and what have you. Gus, he thinks it's too hot. He's about to leave the set. And in thinking about what show we should have for our opening show on Cabin Country, I hit upon a guest that we have had several times on North Country Sportsman over the years, an old friend and a man that's quite knowledgeable in the ways of the lumberjack in the Adirondack in northern New York area. And at this point here, I would like very much to introduce my guest tonight, the Reverend Frank Reed. Reverend Reed, welcome to Cabin Country.
Very glad to be with you. Thank you.
And Reverend Reed, as some of you may know and some of you may have read, and if you haven't, I'll show you a copy of Reverend Reed's book, The Lumberjack Sky Pilot, which is a book that he had written on his travels in the Adirondack from lumber camp to lumber camp while he followed the ministry. And before we get into much of a discussion, Reverend Reed, I think it's really imperative that we get to that beautiful piece of film which you shot back in the 30s and 40s, I understand.
Yes, that's right.
This film we had featured from time to time on North Country Sportsman with Glenn, but I never really had the time to delve into it in any length and depth. And here with this show, I'm hoping that we can put together a pretty good hour for you. So we have edited Reverend Reed's film for tonight's show, and he has agreed to drive up here and is here from Lakemont, where he runs a publishing firm now, right?
Yes, that's right. We have a book publishing firm, yes.
In Lakemont. And you're retired now from the ministry?
Yes, that's right.
Well, I think we can discuss this at the end of the film, but I really would like to get to that film. It's a fantastic piece of film, shot by Reverend Reed, 30s and 40s, while he was following his ministry in the Adirondacks. So without further ado, I'd like to get right to the film, and you can narrate it for us.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. This shows the cutting and peeling season in the woods years ago, back in the 30s and 40s, and before that, where they were felling the trees from May until the middle of August with a crosscut saw, and then peeling them with this spud. A spud was not a potato, but a metal instrument that had a wood handle, and you notice they roll the bark off the tree during the peeling season. This particular scene here is taken on the Beaver River on a job run by Clarence Strife of Old Forge, and Frank Dacre, the foreman, is swinging the axe. They're getting a small tree out of the way to cut this big tree, which has been notched, with a crosscut saw, which prevailed in that time. Then they'll drive in the wedge, and the good lumberjack will place his tree where it belongs every time.
Notice how he takes that wedge away while that tree falls.
And this is where they call out timber. Here is the tree that has been peeled, is lying on the ground until the skidding season later on. This is on Mr. Clarence Strife's job on the Beaver River, and the logs and the land are logs and land of the International Paper Company. Frank Dacre is coming back to camp and is approaching the camp office, the camp headquarters. Here is Frank Krisky, the cookee or cook's assistant, doing his washing. Now we travel to the Indian River, far back of Old Forge and McKeever to the eastward, and here is a tractor with a tote with some supplies on a sled, and here is the interior of Camp Number 1 for the Gould Paper Company, a log camp built about 17 miles back in the woods from the highway. And here they are skidding the logs, which these are 13 feet 4 inches in length. They will be cut into 32-inch blocks later on at the mill. And here they're being rolled down with a peavey over the backside of Indian Lake Mountain, which is far back in the woods. This shows the kind of tools used, and this is Little Indian Lake, not the Indian Lake farther east, but back in the woods, and here is a skidway ready for winter hauling. Some deer outside of camp, and that is 14 inches of snow on the Indian River. This is the Bisbee Clubhouse near Old Forge, which burned that morning. And now we travel to the Tug Hill country, where you see the Lynn tractors hauling the big sprinkler or water box, which is used to ice the roads for the winter haul. And here is Joe Moran, the foreman of that camp, with his tractor now hooking onto a water box to start icing the roads.
How many miles of road would they ice there, Frank?
I think they had about 10 miles of iced roads there. That went down to the landing on Fish Creek. The snow was shovel-handle deep, always deep in the Tug Hill country. And here they're using the block and line to load the top of the load. That was the way they did it in the Tug Hill country.
Was that a wooden rail or a steel rail they went up?
No, that's a wooden rail. And here they put on a doubling team because this part of the load out to the main haul was kind of soft. Here in the Adirondacks, the superintendent and foreman supervising work in the woods, and this is Camp Number 2, run by Levi Godden, 19 miles in from the highway. This was Pete Landry, the clerk in a pinch frying camp at Boris Ponds over in the east side of the woods. And here the men are busy at work at the dinner table. The camps were well supplied with food. They had good cooks, a good variety of food, and plenty of it, and men that are hungry at mealtime. This is the bunkhouse with single bunks in double-decker style, and the bull cook is petting his pet cat. Here Glenn Fallon is hauling a load of logs with his team down a hill which has been sanded. Glenn grew up near Utica, or north of Utica, and spent his life in the woods. Frank McCarthy is the seamster on the next team. He has a voice that will carry about a quarter of a mile, was very witty, and always the life of the camp when he was there. The next load is crowding the horses a little So the road monkey, who takes care of a section of the road, sprinkles on a little sand. And here's Hugh, the superintendent, in a hurry on the way to his next job. And here he is going around with his snowmobile. We're at camp number 3. You notice in the wintertime, and here they're taking out the lunch to the men. And he was going to make the rounds of the job to see what trouble there might be that day, and he found quite a lot of trouble. Lowell Holland, who grew up near Lowville, has brought a part of a load from the upper yard to the lower yard. Lowell worked on the Alcan Highway for a while before this picture was taken. And here is the Big Lynn tractor with its big load coming down the mountain and now on the level on the way to the landing about 10 miles away. There is the load on the way to the landing. And here Lowell is coming, bring some more down the mountain. At the top of the hill is Pat Morrissey, a road monkey, and Joe McDermott, a foreman of this job.
What would one of those sleds weigh, Frank?
The empty sled, or then?
No, one load.
Well, that held about 4.5 cords, I think, and it weighed about 1.5 tons to the cord, the wood. So you'd have about 7. The load of the sleigh and the would weigh about 7 or 8 cords.
You'd have a few ton there then, right?
This is about 110 cords on the tractor and on the sleighs behind this tractor on the way to the landing on the Moose River. That will later land at the Gould Paper Company mill in Lyons Falls, New York. This is in the middle of the winter, you see.
Those roads were iced?
They were well iced, and this is the Indian River, one of 4 Indian rivers in northern New York. They were hauling some empties back up the hill. It was the day before the job closed on March 2nd, and was kind of hard hauling there. Here they're bringing a load down from the upper yard to the lower yard, and they'll hook them together. I think Carl Carmer was in on this job and wrote his chapter on the whistle punk and the road monkey and Listen to the Lonesome Drum. Here you see them putting in the bowl pole that keeps the load from crowding. And now the whistle punk hooks up the cross chains that are used to haul the load. There are 10 sleigh loads behind this, so they have to be pretty secure. And here Joe Gordon has his taxi, winter taxi, down at winter headquarters.
Doesn't look like today's snowmobile, does it?
Quite different. And here at the landing on the Moose River, the job is nearly done. This is a day or two before the end. They had 22,000 cords of pulpwood in the river at that point. You can see somehow how the landing is made up. They build a bridge across the river, and then they bring a sleigh load or a train load out on the river and roll them down in the stream. So they fill in between these bridges, so the river becomes full of logs at that point. This is one of the earliest pictures I took. That was taken in black and white, and here's number 1 going around an S-turn near the landing. That had 11 sleigh loads behind the tractor, which also had a load on the tractor.
Yes, we might point out for our viewers that some of this is in black and white and some of it is in color.
Oh, yes. And here you see the skill of the lumberjack in unloading the logs with his peavey. He's a very experienced and skillful man in his very important work. In my many years in the Adirondacks, about 50 years, I had an increasing appreciation of the lumberjack and the fine work he was doing for the service of all of us. Now these scenes are on Fish Creek in the Adirondacks, up out of West Leyden a few miles, a job that was run by Elmer Bernier for the Gould Paper Company along in 39 and 40, and you see the driving on Fish Creek. There was Gerald Frederick, the clerk, and here's Frank Elaine, who is one of the men. He was married soon after this picture was taken. he became accustomed to risks. Now, he isn't quite as skillful as his boss, Joe Moran, who you'll see in the pictures a little later here. Joe is the man with the top shirt there in front to our right, and you'll see some of his skillful work in driving the logs. Joe grew up along one of the Canadian rivers where he learned to run logs and drive logs as a boy. He's a very skillful log driver.
Did they have apprentice drivers? Did they teach the trade too?
Well, they couldn't do it here. They didn't do it much in the Adirondacks because there was so much, with compensation, there was so much risk involved. So I guess they had men who were trained and grew up in other places in the later years of driving to do it. Here you'll see skidways, landings along the river. Now, Joe, again, here appears without his top shirt. It's been removed, the implication being you ain't seen nothing yet. Now you see the man behind is sprinkling the logs so to start another skidway or bridge down. And here you see Joe with his spike shoes, his peavey, and a lot of skill that he's built up over the years.
You got a lot of exercise then.
Yes. An inexperienced man wouldn't be allowed to do this. It needs a man of great experience. Now you see here, as his foot goes in, he puts his knee over the log in front and avoids an accident very simply. An unskilled man like you or me with him would have gone in on that one.
Oh, I'm sure.
And here you see him...
I wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have been out there.
tripping the dam on Roaring Brook, which is a tributary of Fish Creek. He simply lifts these splashboards with his pike pole. He's going to use it to let the water out and the logs out to give both a head of water and supply of logs to run down Roaring Brook and Fish Creek. Here he's untying the boom and is letting logs down through the spillway. And that stream is Roaring Brook.
It's enough to give a trout a headache, right?
And here Joe is using the pike pole to steer the logs, getting them straight to go through the spillway. Yeah, that's a pretty rough stream.
It's a one-man operation. You need to have a couple fellas feeding logs down to him.
No, they have, I think, about 50 or 60 men in the camp altogether working around on the streams in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Joe has 3 or 4 men with him here. Incidentally, these pictures were taken with my camera by Elmer Bernier, the superintendent of the job, the operator on the job. And here they're feeding well through the spillway into the stream and will run down into the larger stream into Fish Creek.
You got a chance to shoot film then when color film first came into its own.
And here is Fish Creek with some logs floating down, and this is at the forward end of a long jam about a quarter of a mile long, and there Martell gets wet feet at least.
Now, if that had been deep water, he could have been gone, right?
Yeah, he said he fell in on purpose, but the fellows didn't believe him. Now we're still at the forward end of the jam. Some of the logs are moving, but the jam hasn't broken yet. When it's ready to give way, I'll tell you. Still, a few logs at the forward end are moving, but not the jam yet. They were looking for the key log there to get it moving, and you'll see the man standing over Gerald is standing over the key log here. They were working channels on both sides, and pretty soon there it's breaking a little, and here it's giving way. The whole jam is moving down the river to the landing, where they will be hauled by truck to the Gould paper mill at Lyons Falls. This is the drive on Fish Creek in the Tug Hill area.
He stayed right with that drive all the way down.
And now we're on the drive on the Moose River, about 7 miles below McKeever on the way to Lyons Falls. These are logs which you saw way back in the woods 40 miles a little while before. These men are working on center jams with large, heavy boats. They're working in teams of crews of three. When they break that jam, you see they get in the boat. One man is handling the oars. One man is in the stern, which is downstream on our left. The man on our right is coiling a rope as the boat drifts down toward another jam. Now just watch what happens. As it comes alongside of that jam, he hops out and makes a safe landing and brings the boat to a halt.
Did they ever miss?
Well, once in a great while, but not very often. This is Jack Roach and Phil Soucy on a small jam with their pike poles, you see. Jack lived near Boonville. Phil Soucy was an old-timer in the woods. They are broking that jam and moving down to another. It's always well for the river driver if he's always in a jam.
Keeps him busy, huh?
A man fell in a little while before I arrived, and the foreman said to me, Hugh Dowling, said, you should have been here a half hour ago. A man fell in, and they made a rapid run and caught him just before he went through a bad rapids.
They chased him with the boat and caught up with him, huh?
Yeah, it would have been a fatal accident, but he went on with his work for the rest of the day without any change of clothing.
They would have to ride those rapids with him with that boat right on down through?
Yeah.
After they caught him?
No, I think they were able to get away from the rapids. They caught him before he went in. Now, this is a little larger jam. They were working on it in the late afternoon and hoping to get it all moving before dark came on. This was, I guess, late April. They were doing this driving. And they don't drive at night. It would be too dangerous. They close the dams above, hold the water for morning, and then drive through the daylight. And here Herb McGee, the foreman, is coming across from the other side with a few of the men over a cable car for supper in the night. And here we're at the Dillon Lance Falls, where the logs have been cut into 32-inch blocks. We're ready for the grinder for paper for your use and mine. Now we're going back to the cutting and felling season, being done with a crosscut saw in a camp near Tupper Lake run by John Devenaugh.
This was before the chainsaw then?
That was before the chainsaw came into use. And here they're getting another spruce tree ready and sawing it with a crosscut. All the felling was done with a crosscut, and even after the chainsaw came into use for a while, felling was done with a crosscut. Here they're peeling the tree, and they can do that during the period from May 15th to August 15th. Here we've turned to a camp on the Cedar River south of Indian Lake. And this camp was a Finch Prine camp. It was a rather large camp and well built. It had running water and showers, and here is the clerk going up to the office. The bunkhouse is in one end, the cook camp in the other, and the shower is in between. Here is the single bunk in double-decker style, a bench at the end of each, a barrel stove to heat the camp, and they're getting ready in the cook camp after a meal for the next meal, and here the men are busy at it. They're heavy eaters, they work hard. You have some very good cooks in the Adirondacks, and they're hard-working men as well as skillful cooks. And here again, the bull cook is in the camp with his pet cat. Filing is pretty important, and this is the filing on the crosscut saw. And here is a man who spent his life as a blacksmith in the woods, and his work is very important. The foreman in a camp, the same camp, I think, over on the Cedar River, and here they skid the trees complete length and later cut them into 4-foot. The horses are skillful as well as the men. They're very well trained, and many of them can do it without the use of the lines. Here they're rolling them onto a rack. Big Mike is rolling them onto a rack with his peavey, He's a Russian who was a great lumberjack, did excellent work, cut 8 or 9 cords a day, and spent his life in the woods here getting wood ready for us.
It's almost as fast as a chainsaw, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And here the foreman is taking a hand with the saw. He wasn't able to do it. And here are 2 of Mike's piles with a log road running between. Mike was a great fellow. Now Clyde Kelly, who lived in St. Regis Falls, is climbing a very steep mountain over at Dorset Mountain near Dorset, Vermont. And here they were hauling the wood down in the fall of the year because on so steep a mountain they couldn't haul it on ice in the winter. And the tractor driver here is held up on a tree, you see, with his load. And here he squeezes between these 2 trees.
Rather tight fit, huh?
Yeah, and here they're breaking over over a steep pitch coming down.
Was this the job the log chutes were?
Yeah.
The one?
Yeah.
They had to haul them out by tractor in the summer rather than run them in the chute.
Yeah, well, so you get the idea of the logs going down this very steep mountain, dragging on the dirt behind so that they wouldn't crowd the tractor. The year before, they had used this chute, and they found that the blocks traveled so fast, 60 or 70 miles an hour, that they weren't able to use it. So they went to the use of the tractor for hauling on bare ground. Here is the road monkey on that road.
Now, how big a section of road would he take care of?
Oh, half a mile or so, maybe a little more. And there's Clyde Kelly going down the hill. You would also be, your knees would bend if you walked on a hill like that. And here is the trail again where they were trailing the logs the year before. And the tractor is going back up the mountain after another load. Is this where and they're cutting it into 4-foot wood blocks with the buck saw down at the landing, and from there it will be trucked to the mill. At that time, they loaded the trucks with the pulp hook in this fashion, throwing them up onto the load. And here is the tractor. This is a binder that's used to bind the load to bring it down the hill.
We watched this. We thought it was somebody playing a joke on somebody. Yeah. That was a real big stick they were bringing out.
Yeah, they have a strong binder. This is a covered bridge over in Vermont. And here they're hauling the wood from up in the hills of Vermont down to the mill. Here they're loading it near, I think this is up in the hills near Stratton Mountain. They're loading the wood to transport to the mill at Mechanicville. Now this is at Jersey Field Lake in the Adirondacks where these big blocks were being handled. And this one is back in Vermont at West Rutland, where Joe LaRue is the foreman of a job run by Johnny Johnson of Port Leyden, New York. Here they were handling the wood in bundles on these steep hills, sort of using it as a... This is the way it was handled. These men are working on piecework. Joe LaRue, foreman, standing by some of his piles. And here we see more of the chaining in bundles down the steep hill. This is the ambulance at Finch Frine Woods headquarters in Newcomb, New York. They're unloading George Shaughnessy from the ambulance.
They must have had a lot of logging accidents doing that kind of work.
Quite a lot of them, yeah. And here, they're getting the camp minister out of trouble.
That wouldn't be your car.
Yeah.
It is.
That was a Hupmobile way back.
The deer?
Deer in the woods, yeah. Now they brought these blocks down in a smaller single sleigh and are loading them on a bigger sleigh to be hauled down to the landing or somewhere near the mill. Back again at Jersey Field Lake, these big spruce and hemlock and blocks that were cut on this virgin forest operation. They were hard to handle with a pulp hook, so the foreman and the superintendent rigged up a loader to load these big blocks onto the sleigh.
That would have been a two-man job, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
To pick that up with a pulp hook?
And here are some piles just lying in the woods, ready for the winter hauling.
They certainly couldn't stack those large ones on the top of the load, could they? They must have put them all on the bottom.
Well, no. And at headquarters camp at Jersey Field Lake, they had about 125 trucks in operation back there in the early 40s, and there was a constant stream of trucks going down to the landing from up in the woods. This job was run by John E. Johnson of Port Leyden, with DeWitt Wiley of Forestport as the superintendent of the operation.
Boy, they're large blocks of pulp. I did a little pulp cutting, here a couple of years ago.
Did you?
Myself, but never blocks that big.
Now, this is the first bulldozer I saw in operation, and that was a machine along with the chainsaw that was destined to change things in the woods.
Yeah, we use a chainsaw and a bulldozer. I can't think of trying to do it with a horse and a bucksaw.
Before that, woods roads were built with a pick and shovel, and what help the horse could give. But when the bulldozer came along, that revolutionized the construction of roads in the woods. Here the pile is down at the landing in Salisbury Center, New York. They're conveyed up with a conveyor to this big pile and were handled by rail to the mill at Mechanicville, New York. We're back at Finch Prine headquarters at Newcomb, and here Pat has his dog that goes up and down the ladder and does a lot of other tricks. And he's a nice dog, though. He's saying his prayers.
Did you have anything to do with that?
I don't think so, no. And here, you'll notice them bringing down the steep hill, getting ready for the bigger load. And here, they're using a cable and drum, to let these loads down the steep mountain.
You can see the cable drag there.
Yeah, you'll see the way the drum is used in a minute. This is Mr. Murdoch, the cook at Camp Number 1 for the Finch Prine, and here is Jack Triggett, the foreman, looking over his sleighs to be ready for the day's operation. And he was one of the early ones to use a tractor in the woods. Most of the work was done by teams, but Jack thought he'd like to try out a tractor. Now they're bringing some down. They'll reload this, and you'll see how they unload it. That wasn't accidental, just a way of unloading the wood.
An accident on purpose, in other words, huh?
And
we thought it was an accident when we first saw it, too, but...
They got me in slow motion here, seeing that big stick of pulp.
Mm-hmm.
Now another load is coming down, and watch how this is unloaded. We see another double load of pulpwood coming down with a cable from the drum at the top of the hill. And you'll notice the drum operator here. I guess that comes.
How long was that cable, Frank?
About 1,800 feet. And here is a load. I think this is starting down the hill.
Mm-hmm. He has a cable on it.
He's got cold feet. The drum operator has cold feet. And there's the drum with 4 wheels. He could stop the load at any time, but applies pressure enough so they will move easily down the mountain.
I'd have had cold feet if they told me to drive the load down the mountain.
Once in a while they had an accident on that, but not very often.
If that cable ever let go, what would it do? Catch up with the horses? The horse is able to stay out of its way or tip over?
Generally, the horses would be killed.
Really?
The driver might roll off, but the horses probably would be killed. That, I think, was the experience where that happened a few cases. Now we're on a job for the Racket River Paper Company over at a place called Seavy's, between Cranberry Lake and Tupper Lake. And here they're hauling loads out of the woods. This morning it was 35 below zero when I took those pictures. And here is a Lynn tractor coming down the road with a load.
Got a good head of steam up too, hasn't he?
Yeah, the cold morning is producing.
Now is that stuck there? I see they break the load.
I don't recall whether there was any reason for that or not. Now we turn to another phase of logging, where they drive logs or pulpwood on the river. They have to build dams, and rock are important in holding the dams in place. So they're hauling the rock here on the West Canada Creek at Noblesboro for a big operation that was going to be carried on. This was to be carried on by the St. Regis Paper Company and the J.P. Lewis Company of Beaver Falls in cooperation. It was under the supervision of Elmer Bernier. But the man who was supervising the construction of the dam was Joe Moran, who lived at Constableville near Boonville. This shows one of the big stones, but there was an even bigger one there. Now they're putting them in place with a loader down in the construction of the dam.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece of color film, being shot that many years ago. Really preserved well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this here, that was excellent color.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The dam was being carefully constructed under the supervision of the foreman, Joe Moran, who had so many fine abilities for work in the woods, where he spent his life and made such a fine contribution.
Yeah, you can see remnants of dams like this up at McKeever yet.
Yeah.
On that road.
I think there's still a remnant of this one over at Noblesboro. As you go up Route 8, you go right past this.
Uh-huh.
There's Joe again. They're backing up a truckload of those big rocks to put them in the dam. And this made a very secure dam. They had to build it very carefully.
Look at how small the dump trucks are then,
Yeah.
Compared to what you see on the highway today.
The truck had quite an evolution, and tires had quite an evolution.
Yes, I would say that must be very rough on tires.
I was always amazed at the skill of a man like Joe Moran, who could do so many things and do them well. And here, these cribs had been built up to hold the boom, to hold the pulpwood in the river. And there is the pulpwood in the river, but farther up the river. And I think this was taken on Jones Brook, which was a tributary of West Canada Creek. This wood was cut in the rough. It was not peeled in the woods. It will be peeled with a barking drum on the way to the mill, as you will see later on. One of the reasons why they weren't peeling at that time, that men were becoming more scarce who had the skill to do the peeling work, so they were cutting it in rough pulp. And there is at Swanson Dam back in the Adirondacks, the pulpwood filled the dam.
A few cord there.
Here is a man by the name of Fredericks, and here is Joe Moran again with his pike pole. Mr. Fredericks again going out on the drive on Jones Brook. And here is the Jones Brook camp, which was used for the cutting and skidding operation, as well as for the river driving crew.
They lived right in that camp all winter.
Oh, yes. Yes, they pretty much year-round there. And here the dam has been opened, the spillway of the dam has been opened so the pulpwood can come down through.
Wouldn't that be an awful surprise for a spring trout fisherman?
I guess it would be, all right, wouldn't it? I'm afraid his boating operation would be spoiled.
Yes, I'm sure.
You'll see it here in slow motion in a moment. And now Elmer Bernier, the superintendent of the job, is poking some 4-foot blocks down with his pike bowl.
Well, the 4-footers didn't jam as easily as the long logs, did they?
No, that was the reason they went to 4-foot in many streams that were difficult to drive. This is slow motion.
Boy, that's beautiful, Phil.
And that is not so slow. Elmer Bernier, by the way, was a very skillful operator who always had his machinery in good order and did a great job. And now down at Nobleboro at the in the pond above the dam, which you saw in construction, the pulpwood is in the river. And here the booms were held in place. Now we're turning to another drive, the Finch Pine Drive on the Hudson River. This was taken a few miles at North River, a few miles above the village of North Creek, at a point where the state road runs near to the river. And the driving of 4-foot pulpwood is a somewhat different operation, especially in the Swift River. The pulpwood often becomes lodged on stones and requiring a good deal of just brute strength to get it removed.
Now, when they were to drive something like that, Frank, with bark on it, did a shallow river like that debark a lot of it?
This was peeled wood.
This was all peeled wood, yeah.
This was peeled wood, where the last drive we were looking at was unpeeled. And here's Jim Haley, an old river driver, with his crew of 3 in the boat on the Hudson River. Here comes another boat down, rocking back and forth.
Be a canoeist nightmare, wouldn't it?
Now we're back at Nobleboro on the West Canada Creek. The unpeeled wood was being peeled in a barking drum and handled by conveyor, loaded on trucks, and from there to the mill at DeFerret and at Lyons Falls. This was during the, and here is his power saw, sawing some blocks off.
Was this was before the chainsaw itself?
Yes,
then, this
yeah.
Power saw.
Now you see the age of new machinery.
Oh, yeah.
Where the skidder has come into use, and with the skidder and the cables, they're bringing a load of hardwood logs down for quite a distance to a landing. In most of my years in the woods, my early years, the horse, the crosscut, the axe, the peavey were the principal methods used, but later on the machine age came in with great changes in the method of logging.
You were telling me an interesting story before we started this film about having seen and got a chance to see that first Homelight chainsaw.
Yes, the Homelight Company didn't have a chainsaw, a gasoline chainsaw, so they sent a former vice president around to make a study, and he spent some time with me. I could tell him where they were being used, how they were being used. He went to the camps. They came out with a new chainsaw. The Homelight Company had just one at that time. They demonstrated it at the Woodsman's Field Day in Tupper Lake, and he stopped at my house in Old Forge on the way to Tupper Lake to show me this new chainsaw when the Homelight Company had one gasoline-driven chainsaw.
That's something.
Now, I'm not sure whether this camp is in, that camp was in Maine or New Hampshire. But here we see some of the work that's being done on a mechanized basis. Here is the truck that has largely replaced the bin tractor as a method of hauling.
Amazes me the height of the loads they get on these.
And here you see the truck wasn't able to handle it altogether, so the tractor helped out a little. This job was run by Oliver Skelton, of Old Forge, who was a truck operator and later a logging operator for a good many years. Died some years ago. And here they were handling the logs in bundles with chains in the loader, you see. Some of the big logs they might handle with hooks, but the smaller ones were being handled in bundles.
There's just one shot of that truck coming up the hill. I just amazes me what kept that truck right side up.
Yeah.
This one coming up.
Let's see, we have this coming. Now you see some more of the mechanized type of logging with the loader, the truck, the chainsaw, the bulldozer to build roads, and they changed completely the method of logging and the personnel in the woods. Now here's a man pulling the hook from the loader.
I think this is the sequence that I was referring to. The log truck couldn't get up the hill alone.
Here is a tractor with a winch, probably, helping to pull the truck up the hill.
Watch the cab of that truck and that load itself, and watch it shift to the left. What kept that truck right side up other than maybe the cable?
It
right here in this sequence.
Changed the direction of the load.
Well, the man riding on the fender thought it was going to go.
And
Watch
here
it. Look at it
you
shift.
notice it almost goes over.
He decided it was time to get off.
It may be the point from which the load was being pulled was a factor in it not tipping over. The tractor and the loader and the bulldozer are now a vital part of the operation in the woods, and here you see the bulldozer at work. I don't know why I didn't think about putting a blade on a tractor years before it happened. It's a very simple thing that somebody should have thought of, but didn't.
Yeah. Simplify the road.
This is a big landing of logs gotten out by Clarence Strife of Old Forge, and the landing is north of Old Forge, near a place called Carter. They're handling the logs from the trucks in bundles, you see, putting them in this big landing, and they later on were trucked to the mill. I think at this season of the year, they had to get them out of the woods on good roads, and so they put them here for a while. Back in 1948, we moved the Woodsman's Club from Forestport to the village of Old Forge, and we decided we'd experiment with a field day. And this is the Woodsman's Field Day of 1948 at Old Forge, and this is the winning crosscut crew. You'll notice that the crosscut saw and the chainsaw, or the buck saw, were very prominent still.
The chainsaw really hadn't come into its own then?
No, it hadn't. You see, the buck saw was the major method of cutting, was the method of cutting.
Chainsaw.
Now, a chainsaw has come into use. This is a one-man chainsaw. The first ones we had were two-man saws. The first one I saw was made in Germany. Then the Diston and the Maul, this type of saw, were the ones used. Later on, they got the idea of a one-man saw, which became much more effective in the woods. But this was the saw used at the time, not for felling, but for bucking the wood after the tree had been felled. And here, I think, are some of the people at Tupper Lake, and there was the barber's pole where Paul Bunyan shaved a man with his axe. This is the tree felling contest, where they're felling with an axe and trying to hit a pole, or hit a stake that's driven in the ground. You see, he didn't. Yes, he hit the stake, but didn't drive
But
it.
he didn't drive. You were saying that at one of these contests, you had 7 contestants drive the stake?
Yes, at Lowville, the northeastern contest one year, 7 men drove the stake, and we had to settle it on time. Now, this is a load of logs in the parade and on display at Tupper Lake at the Woodsman's Field Day. They came from the woods over near Newcomb, north of Newcomb.
Man saw that load come into his sawmill and make his eyes light up, wouldn't it?
Pretty big logs, a couple of them not so pretty there. This boy, his father, worked for the Simon Saw Company. And here at one of the field days, here is a sawmill at Cherry Springs near Coudersport and Gailton in northern Pennsylvania. And here are some of the machinery that's being displayed and used in that Woodsman's Carnival, and here are some of the people on hand. Now we change from northern Pennsylvania to Vermont, where they're having another Lumberjack Roundup, they called that, at a lake near Middlebury, Vermont, and here are the father and son burling logs. These men came from northern Michigan. They had kept up their skills in burling and driving, and so gave demonstrations around the country. It's a question of which man is going to stay on the longest.
They managed to lose their pants a few times too, didn't they?
Is this the last scene?
No.
And here are some more of the contests at the Lumberjack Roundup in Vermont. For a number of years, a man by the name of Walter Adams was the best chopper in the country. Then David Gear of Connecticut became sort of world champion. He even chopped in Australia.
Yeah, we had Dave Gear on Sportsman one year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite a chopper. He
And,
chopped right here in the studio.
And here are the men again from northern Michigan who are burling, trying to throw each other off the log at the Lumberjack Roundup in Lake Dunmore near Middlebury, Vermont.
Having trouble keeping their pants up again, huh?
The father is on the left. Which one is going to stay on the longest? There the father goes, and now the son.
Well, Frank, I'll tell you, that's just a fantastic piece of film. I don't know how many times I've watched that since you sent it up to me, and every time I see that, I really get a kick out of it. It amazes me, the quality, and how well that film preserved for you over the years.
Well, you know, shortly after I started in, they had developed a process, a more permanent process for color film. I used colored film for most of it. And I was back in the woods where I was able to get pictures that aren't very much available anymore, except the ones I have.
Boy, it's fantastic. I understand that you were telling me that, I don't know, Albany, but Blue Mountain Lake has a copy of this now.
They have a copy at the museum in Blue Mountain Lake, and these are, after you get through, are to go to the museum in Albany, where they're going to use them to develop the logging department of the State Museum in Albany.
Well, I hope you don't mind if I store some of that on videotape for a while, because that really is a fantastic piece of film. And every time I see it, I kind of wish it, I had a print of my own to keep around, because things like this I find very, very interesting to anybody that likes the outdoors, or spend any time at all in the outdoors.
Well, if you want to make a copy, you're perfectly free.
Well, I think we might be able to talk about it. Listen, before we run out of time, I really would like to go through a few of the books. You travel a long way from Lakemont up here, and I think it's only fair that we show a few of your books that you've published down there. And of course, your own book, Lumberjack Sky Pilot, has been out now how many years?
That came out in '65. I retired from as editor of the Northern Logger in '64, and from the organization '66, and moved down on Seneca Lake just north of Watkins Glen, by the way.
Oh, you must have had an interesting time down there this past summer.
Oh, the stream of traffic going in last week was something.
No kidding.
And so now in retirement, we have this little book publishing firm. I have two partners from Boonville, and Bill Charbonneau and John Mahaffey, who worked with me on the logger.
I contacted John to find you. You know, it was quite a search trying to track you down. I started in Old Forge and ended up with John, and then John finally gave me your telephone number and address in Lakemont. What other books? We've got Lumberjack Sky Pilot. This is one I had heard a lot about, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
That's French Louis, the Adirondack hermit in the southern Adirondacks at Canada Lakes. And we have some of these yet on hand, and it's a very interesting book, and he led a rather interesting life. Now, this book came out on the 2nd of May, Rails in the North Woods. Is he getting? He wants to get
Let's
that?
see, I'll get it right over here.
And
get a good shot of this.
Some of the railroads involved there are logging railroads. Some of them around Wanakina and Star Lake and Cranberry Lake and other places here in the north. They're all from northern New York. Mm-hmm. This is a book about Old Forge and the West Canada Creek by David Beadle that we did a while ago. It had been done before. This one was written by 8 retired men, including myself, The Hills Beyond the Hills.
This is your newest one, right?
No, this one is.
Well, that one's your newest one.
The railroad book, and this is, there were 8 retired men.
Yes, sir. 400 years in the ministry.
Who cooperated in writing that book, and we got out a second edition of it. And then this is our most recent one by a lady in Brookfield, New York, down south of Utica, who wrote about life in her area over quite a long period of years. Mm-hmm. So we have the North Country Books office downstairs at the house, and even though I get around with canes now, and I'm able to work most every day on this book program.
Well, I know I've called you sometimes rather early in the morning and find you up and about at the house. I did wake you up from one afternoon nap, I think.
I moved, since May 2nd, when Rails in the North Woods came out, I moved 1,013 books from our office there.
Sounds to me like you're doing a little better in retirement than you did in active life.
Well, we're not making much money, but we are active anyway.
That's interesting.
And I might say that I think the retired person has to feel that he's doing something useful. Now, it may be that he must only think he's doing something useful, but I think he's got to think so at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, Frank, I really want to thank you for coming up, my friend, because this has made it a very interesting first show for me, and I really can't thank you enough. And I'd like to invite everybody to stay tuned next Monday night for Cabin Country, when we hope to bring you a film. This is The Mallard for you duck hunters. Thanks again, Frank, and we'll see you next week.
Am I still on?